So this morning what we're talking about is the power of connection. And I think actually this is a really, really important thing to think about. Because I think it really hits on a big problem in our culture at the moment. Louise, don't worry if it's too much stress.
It's a bit weird.
Yeah, don't worry. Okay, but so what I'm going to do today is we're talking about problem we've got in our culture, how Jesus makes a difference, and what we can do practically in light of that. Just before I do kind of just start talking about that, I think it's really important to kind of notice that I'm reading a book at the moment about a guy who spent years in North India as a Christian, reaching out to people there. And his thing was basically, if you want to share about Jesus to someone, you've always got to ask what's the need of the culture you're in. So, for example, he made the example of lots of missionaries who went to Cambodia. When he spoke to them, the thing that they connected with wasn't like kind of what Western Christians would, about kind of logic and being rational and stuff like that. It was, they believed that there was a creator, but they weren't in the right connection with that creator, and they wanted to be. So you had to kind of talk about that. Or if I find, just for a lot of people my age, if you start talking to them about forgiveness of sins or justification and stuff like that, they can switch off a little bit because they don't really believe in sin. Or they live in a culture that constantly tells them nothing's really right and wrong, it's up to you. But if you start talking to them about there being something missing in your heart, and Jesus can fill that, like there's a hunger in us and he's the bread of life, they really connect with that, if that makes sense. So it's always interesting to ask, what's the need and how can we kind of scratch it? So, I would say the big need, actually I think, one of the biggest needs in our culture at the moment, particularly, I'd say, for younger people, I don't know, you'd have to reflect everyone else, you think it's for older people as well, probably is individualism and loneliness. So we live in a culture that's quite unique actually if you look at human history. Most human societies, most places will do everything together. So they'll be around each other all the time and you have very little time by yourself. Which is why if you were a Christian in medieval Cambridge and you went to, I don't know, St. Francis or whatever down the road, the reason why it was the service was so quiet and boring was because it's the only time in your week you weren't around people. So it's the only time in the week you actually got time to be still and reflect and be quiet and focus on God. Whereas now, it's completely switched, hasn't it? I think for a lot of people, Sunday at church could be for some people their most social time of the week because it's one of the only times you're actually around people consistently and it's not task-orientated, if that makes sense. So, it's a big old problem we have. Thanks, David. Sorry, no, good job, Louise. All right, thanks a lot. Right, okay, so, if I could do the next slide. Okay, so, I was on BBC News earlier and I saw this woman. They do this quite a lot now on the BBC News. They get someone to write an article about what's going on in their life, and they always send in the best-looking photo of them. This is a girl called Alice, who's 29, and she was celebrating her birthday last year during the lockdown, and this was her reflection. She said, loneliness is a widespread problem, even prior to the pandemic. It's not only incredibly isolating, but it's very stigmatised and often associated with the older generation, despite more young people struggling with loneliness. 3 times as many young people deal with loneliness compared to older people. And I checked that out, statistically that's true. They did a survey and 46% of people in Western Europe and America said they feel lonely most of the time, or the majority of the time. And that's kind of age, I think 22 onwards. It makes sense, doesn't it? If you think about how society works, you go to school and it's very communal. I always think as someone who works in a secondary school, when I'm around the kids, I think, do you guys actually appreciate how good this is? That you've got all these people around you all the time. And yeah, you have to go to lessons and get shouted at and stuff like that, but the whole time your mates are there. Or people you kind of, maybe they're not your mates, but you kind of know them and you've got a relationship and you're doing stuff together all the time and you're bonding over that. The year 11s in my school are about to leave next week. And I did an assembly with them 2 weeks ago. And I spoke about this and I was kind of like, you guys are all getting in trouble and you don't know why. And I think it's because you're just sad, because you're realising that this communal thing that you've got is going to end because you're all going to go to different places. And then you go on to sixth form or university and that's very communal. But then after that, when you move into kind of working life, graduate life, I think you're going to spend the majority of time by yourself. And people feel that, particularly people who've left this age group. And this is what this woman Alice was talking about. Okay, Louise, next slide. She said, as a neuroscientist, I think people underestimate the impact loneliness has on our brain and health, with lonely people being more than twice as likely to have mental health issues, and loneliness is considered a bigger health risk now than smoking or obesity. So that's really interesting. The NHS are saying loneliness is a bigger problem than smoking or obesity for us. So, come to the next slide. Don't know if you know who this is. Scarlett Moffat. She won, there's lots of no's there. She won I'm a Celebrity a while back. She's on Gogglebox. She, but yeah, if you go to the next one, she wrote this. She wrote, so she moved to London after she won the show to move into kind of the entertainment industry. And she said she felt really lonely. And I remember feeling guilt when I felt lonely because too many people have no reason to feel alone, but loneliness affects us all. And she said this, in a world of social media, it's not always clear to see when people are feeling sad or lonely. So so she goes to this new place and finds it really hard to get to know people and to have relationships of depth. That's the key thing. You might know a few people, but there's maybe not that much depth. And then she was saying, what's worse is every day you go on your phone and you're scrolling through and everyone's posting photos of them doing fun stuff with their friends. And it makes you feel more lonely. But she knows, she's saying, I know that's not the reality of their lives, but that's how it feels. Okay, Louise, next slide. I don't know you probably won't know what this is. This is a new phenomenon that's sprung up in the last couple of years. It's really big in places like Korea and China and Japan. It's called mukbang. I think I might have said that wrong. What you do is basically YouTubers who post videos of themselves eating. So it'll be like a half-hour video. So this woman here is eating some noodles, lots of various things, and it has thousands and thousands of subscribers, people who watch it every day. And they asked one person, why are people doing this? And she said, it gives lonely people a feeling of connection. That people are lonely, so they're eating their food by themselves, and what they want is to feel like they're not by themselves. So they'll watch someone else eating. Millions of miles, thousands of miles away in a different country. Okay, Louise. And think about it, these are all the kind of TV shows that have been the most popular in the last 20 years, particularly amongst my age group. And so we've got Friends, we've got The Big Bang Theory, we've got The Office, the American version there, we've got a show called Community. Those are the top 4 in a vote. And if you just look at every single one, what do you notice? It's a group of people in community doing stuff together. And the question is always, do they have jobs? Because, everything's happening, we're always just like hanging out together and stuff. But Friends, I think, is a great example. It's 6 young professionals in New York who have 2 flats next to each other, and all the action takes place in the 2 flats. They're just doing stuff together the whole time. Now, I think one of the reasons why this connects so much with people is because people are longing for that type of connection and relationship, and they long for that type of community. And so many people say when these shows end, I feel like I've lost actual friends. I feel like, I've actually lost something I was part of. I find this really interesting quote about it. This was, so kind of Max and Anna Marie's generation got really into Friends a few years ago. And they were saying this is interesting because that doesn't normally happen. TV shows have a generation and then that's it. But they said Friends is actually really connected with younger people as well. And they said this comment, they're all communicating and paying attention to each other. In this age, everyone would just be texting on their phone, or the 6 of them would be around the table doing social media. We wouldn't get all the jokes that we've got because they wouldn't be engaging with each other. Really interesting, isn't it? Next slide, Louise. I mean, how many times have you seen this? It's really common, isn't it? If we went to Cambridge City Centre, we'd see a lot of this. Lots of groups of people all on their phone for half the time. And I saw this quote about social media, which I thought was really good. You've got millions of strangers pretending to be friends on social media. If you actually look at the percentage of time people now are spending on this stuff, more and more, it's huge. And all sociologists are saying it gives the illusion of connection without the actual connection. And so it actually makes people end up feeling worse, but then they get addicted to it because they feel like it's giving them what they're looking for. Okay, and then Mother Teresa said this. She said, in the West, so she worked with a lot of people in Calcutta who had leprosy, but she said in the West, there's something worse, which is loneliness. She said, actually, when I come here, you guys have got a real problem you don't even see. At least we know it's a problem in India, which is loneliness. Okay, next one, please. And this is so many things. Just as a quick example, before we go on to Jesus, like, if you go into any supermarket now, we've become so removed from people when it comes to making and getting and eating food, haven't we? Like, it used to be, back in the day, if you were cultivating food, you'd have lots of people working on fields together. And you probably, as you do when you work with people on manual jobs, you spend a lot of time just talking to each other, or just being in each other's company, or having little in-jokes, or maybe singing songs. And then when you went to sell food, you'd have to go to a market, and you'd have a relationship with a person. They'd be like, there's Bob who sells onions, and Sarah who makes bread or whatever. And you build up your relationship with them, wouldn't you? You'd probably have a chat to them. Yes. My grandparents used to talk about how they'd always have a really long chat with a butcher, or that kind of thing. And they knew all about their family and what was going on and stuff like that. What do we do now? You rush into a busy place where everyone's all a bit stressed. You get your few bits, and then you can go to a self-checkout. You don't even have to talk to someone on the checkout anymore. And you could have got someone who's really chatty, and you have quite a shallow conversation. Or you could have got like me when I was 19 years old, who's just grumpy and doesn't want to be there, but just wants to get paid. He's not going to talk to you and wants to rush you through. But you don't even have to have any interaction there now. And then when we get, for most, if you look statistically, the amount of people now who are eating meals by themselves, who are not with other people. It's really interesting, with some of the kids at school, some of the kids that are the most confident, I'd say, or the most have got maybe the best attitude to getting stuck into stuff, even if they're not that good academically. There's often they'll talk about eating with their family, and mealtime's been quite important. There are a lot of the kids that maybe aren't as engaged and struggle a bit, they'll often just go up into their room, if that makes sense. I guess what I'm saying is, in society, it's a huge disconnection. More and more are spending time by themselves. Okay, now here's the difference. If you look at the opening chapter of the Bible, when it says, okay, how do human beings come about? This is what God says. Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness. And God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. I think that's really interesting, isn't it? Jewish people who aren't Christians don't really know what to do with this bit, because it uses plural words of God saying, let us make mankind in our own image. So every single human being still now is made in the image of God, which means we are like God in some ways. And because God he's one, but he's also three persons, he's a community. So for the whole of existence, for the whole of eternity, there's been a community at the heart of everything. And that community brings forth life, and it brings forth human beings. And so if we want to image God, we need to be in community around people. Does that make sense? Yeah. And again, most human cultures have got this throughout human history, and they understand it. But in the West, we haven't realised that we've cut this out, and we've made everything much more kind of individualised and removed from people. And we think like that. Everything's all about me and how I think. Where if you go to other parts of the world, they don't think like that. They think about, what does the group think? How does this work for all of us? So it's a really important part of how I'm made. Okay, Louise, come next bit. Okay. But what's really interesting, so God creates this guy, Adam. He's in the garden. And I think we can get so wrapped up with when we hear this stuff, did it happen, did it not, is it scientific? We miss out on these really powerful messages. And one of them is that you've got the man who's in really good relationship with God. So he's with God all the time, and it's just, being surrounded by his love and his goodness and his companionship. And still, God says it's not good for the man to be alone. Now, this wasn't like God made it and was then oh, whoops, something's gone wrong here. Let's tweak a little bit and see if we can work it out. He's purposely, I think, showing Adam, you need someone else. You need Eve. You're not supposed to do it by yourself. And then he creates Eve. And there's this idea, when it says in Genesis chapter 1, let us create them in our own image, that's the bit that comes first. It doesn't say God created Adam and then he created Eve. It says, let us create them in our image. So it was always his plan, but maybe he wanted Adam to kind of see that of you need each other. That's really important. You only image me properly when you have each other together. Then he says to them, go and have lots of kids. To grow community, basically. Be around people, they're important. But I think it's really interesting, even when Adam was in the good state with God, God says you still need people. Yeah. Most Christians throughout the last 2,000 years have got that. We had a short time of where people would go off into caves, or would live on a pole for 20 years by themselves, and just to connect with God. You get these kind of ascetic monks. But for most, and I think, fair play to them, maybe that was the right thing for them at the time, although it sounds horrible. But I bet they became a bit weird, because you're not functioning, you're not supposed to be like that. You're not supposed to function like that. We're supposed to be in communities. That's what God loves to do. I think he loves community. And when we do it, we image his. Because also the community of God, this is when the early church theologians were thinking, how do we explain the Trinity, the thing you can't explain? They use these metaphors of it's like a constant state of movement, because they all love each other and they all enjoy one another and are doing that the whole time. And they're giving love to one another. So the Father is constantly loving the Son, and the Son is loving the Father back, and the Spirit the same. So you've got this kind of movement of just constant love and connection community. And that's what we're made for. So we need both connection with God and connection with one another. All of us need that as human beings. If you have none of those, life's going to be rubbish. If you have one but not the other, life's going to be maybe okay but tough. You need both. Okay, Louise? John's Gospel records this really interesting prayer that Jesus says. He says, my prayer is not for them alone, the disciples. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. So that's really interesting. One of Jesus' last prayers before he knows he's going to get arrested and die is, I want those guys to be one. I want there to be community and connection amongst each other, just like we have, Father. So when we're entering into, that's God's heart for us, that we would know that kind of depth of intimacy and connection that the Father has with Jesus, Jesus has with the Father. Okay, next bit. Okay, right, I thought this really interesting quote came in from, I found this from Eugene Peterson, the guy who did the Message translation of the Bible. He said, most of us, most of the time, feel left out, misfits. We don't belong. Others seem so confident, so sure of themselves, insiders who know the ropes, old hands and a club from which we are excluded. Anyone relate to that? Ever felt like that in your life? Ever felt like that at your job or in your workplace, even in family? Ever felt like that at school, even in a church? It's very possible. It's very normal. He says, one of the ways we have responded to this is to form our own club or join one that will have us. Here at least, it's one place where you are in and others out. The clubs range from informal to formal and gatherings that are variously political, social, cultural and economic. But the one thing they have in common is the principle of exclusion. Identity or worth is achieved by excluding all but chosen. The terrible price we pay for keeping all those other people out so that we can savour the sweetness of being insiders is the reduction of reality, a shrinkage of life. I quite like that. So he says what we do, because we feel we don't fit in and we feel disconnected, is we form a group. But for lots of people, the only way that group really works is it's got to be exclusive. So you're kind of together and it's quite hard to get in. I thought that was quite interesting. It can be like that sometimes. I don't know if you've had that. Some of the groups now I'm a part of, it's taken me almost like a year or two to get in there. You really have to get your way in there sometimes. It's not always easy. One of the football clubs I'm part of, I had to do quite a bit, it was hard work, I had to make a lot of effort to get in there. Or I had to do, have quite a few good games where they're like, oh, he's the right player, okay, he's okay. Whereas if I hadn't have played that well, they wouldn't have embraced me. Does that make sense? Yeah. That's the kind of, I think, the standard thing that can kind of happen. But what we really want, what we're really looking for, is, I think, a community that you see in Winnie the Pooh. I thought this is a really good illustration of how Christian community is supposed to be different. Christian community is supposed to be, we welcome you in. And welcome you in right from the start. You don't have to prove yourself to us. We don't get identity by being exclusive. You're welcome into a family. Yes. And come in and join us. I think Winnie the Pooh is a really good example of this, because every single character in here Because when we think community, we think stuff like Friends, where it's fun all the time, and it's always enjoyable, and you fall out within 10 minutes, you've had a heart-to-heart, and it's all worked out. Real community isn't always like that, is it? Real community is hard. And real community, and what I find what a lot of people my age and a bit younger want is they want community, but they want the community they would pick. If that makes sense. Like, I want these 8 people in, and I don't want that person, and this is what we're going to do together. Life's not like that. Again, so it's individualised community, because it's like, this is what I want, and this is how I want it. And if they go to a community that doesn't have that, they'll be like, well, I don't really like it, because that person annoys me a little bit, or, I wish we did this a bit differently, so I'm just not going to bother. So I'd rather be alone than be in a community I haven't picked. In Winnie the Pooh, think about, if you know the characters, every single one of them's got a flaw, right? Winnie the Pooh's a bit thick, isn't he? He does stuff and he doesn't really think about it. And then he's all like, oh, Barbara, that kind of thing. Tigger is really enthusiastic, like, all over the place. He's full of energy, winds people up all the time. Particularly Rabbit. I think Rabbit's always getting annoyed by him. If you don't know any of these characters, I apologise, but Eeyore is always down in the dumps, isn't he? Everything's depressing, and it's not going to work out. And with his little, he had that stick house, didn't he? He'd always fall over in every episode. Owl is pompous and a bit up himself, and he looks down on the others. And Rabbit's always, always panicking and worrying about everything, stressing out. And Piglet is scared to do anything, always living in Pooh's shadow. I feel weird now overanalyzing Winnie the Pooh. Anyway, but the only one who's a bit more normal is Kanga and Roo. They're the two more kind of normal characters. But the point is, even though they've all got those flaws, which are very human flaws that any of us might identify with, they still belong, don't they? They're not like, oh, do you know what? Let's ignore Rabbit a little bit. When it's you're all together and you're all in it, and they know each other's flaws and they work around it. And I think that's a really good image of what the church is supposed to be and what Christian community is supposed to offer that's different from the community that how the world does it. That we'd be more patient with one another, more gracious towards one another. And it's hard, isn't it? It's hard. I get it, we all get it. But it doesn't mean it's not worth it. I'd say some of the best communities I've been in were not people I would have picked. And it took a lot of hard work. But you get this wonderful bond at the end. So I went to a Bible college in Wales, and I was praying, where shall I go, God, after uni? And I just felt really strongly to go there. So I didn't even visit. I was just like, I didn't visit it in the first place. I was like, right, if you said that, God, let's just go. And after my first day, I was like, what have I done? There was very few people my age, lots of people from different countries who maybe the English wasn't that good, so it wasn't necessarily easy conversation at the start. And a lot of the buildings were all falling down and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, and it was 100% the right place, and I loved my time there. But then I kind of got into it. And at first I had this honeymoon stage where I was like, oh, everyone's great, I love it, it's all new people. And then reality hits after a couple of months where I was like, they're really annoying, and they don't wash up their mugs, and they keep banging on about predestination in every lecture, and it was that kind of thing. And I miss my friends at home, and it's not the same. And it kind of got like that. I think this happens a lot of times in community. You have that initial, this is good, then you have the reality check, and then people leave. But what you've got to do is you've got to push through, and you've got to engage with it, I think Jesus taught his disciples, and then you get to the other side, where you get this beautiful kind of just connection, where you know each other's flaws, and they still leave their mugs out, and their voice is still annoying, and whatever, but you actually got real affection for them, and you've got a kind of created group together, if that makes sense. Okay, next one, please. Okay, I thought this is a really interesting quote. This is from someone who was an American bomber crew in England in the Second World War, and he said, the only thing that mattered were human relationships, not money, not position, not even family, only relationships with people who might be dead tomorrow who are important. It's a sort of wonderful state of mind. It's too bad it takes a war to create such a condition among men. Isn't that amazing? They said they had this thing where the unifying thing was we could all die tomorrow because we have to fly in this plane kind of thing. But I think this is a good illustration of what the church is supposed to be. We don't bond because it's over money, or we're into the same sport, or we're all part of the same biological family. We bond because of Jesus and the spiritual family we belong to. And Jesus did this. When God shows up, this is what he did, isn't it? Think about it. He could have showed up in any way. He could have been some religious teacher on like a mountain that you have to go and visit. And he just shared his wisdom. He could have showed up as a king and be like, you have to bow before me because I'm the God who's created everything. He didn't. He showed up as a teacher, a wandering kind of teacher, but he lived in community the whole time. It says here in Luke's Gospel that there were 12 who were with him. So 12 young men who spent the whole time together in community. But he also mentions that Luke mentions that actually there were a couple of women who were part of the group as well, which is really unusual for rabbis at the time. That wasn't done at all. But I think, so you had like Mary, and you had Joanna, and you had Susanna and others, people like that. And it points out actually some of these people, were, big cheeses. You had, Joanna, the wife of Chusa, the manager of Herod's household. She would have left a really privileged lifestyle to go around with these idiots, like the disciples or these guys, for 3 years basically. And I reckon there was a lot of just kind of sitting around together and enjoying a meal and having a laugh and getting to know each other. And then Jesus would tell a story and they'd be like, and then they'd start thinking about it and discussing it. That's what Jesus modelled. Okay, next please. There's quite a few, there's loads of verses in the New Testament that encourage us to do this. But here's one or two. Let's consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some of us are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another. It's interesting, isn't it? It's saying actually one of the best things you could do as a follower of Jesus is just show up to the church community and engage with it. Even in, 60 AD, that was a problem. Some people were a bit like, I can't be bothered, or that person's wound me up, or I don't really like the worship leader this week, or whatever. But the point is, whoever wrote this is saying, get involved, get stuck in. Okay, Louise, next one. There's so many times it says in the New Testament to something one another, so love one another, or stuff like that. And it keeps saying it as brothers and sisters. And that's where the early church stood out, because they did it as family. It wasn't just, we're a community, it was, we are family, we are together. It's a really amazing thing we can offer people today. And fine, when Jesus on the cross, one of the things he said when he's dying, in incredible agony and pain, is he says to John, this is to Mary here, my mum, she's now your mum. And mum be a mum to John. And after that, Mary moves in with him. It's a really interesting little detail that Jesus is like, actually, one thing I'm really concerned about is that you two continue to be in connection with one another. You will need connection, so be there for each other. Okay, and so, what can we do about this? Well, here's a couple of thoughts, practical thoughts to finish on. Number one, we need community as well that isn't just organised. I'll give you half an hour of my time, and then I'm off. Does that make sense? I was actually, most of the time when community has blessed me the most, or I've noticed bonds have grown stronger, or good stuff has happened, have been over more spontaneous community. Don't know if you know what that game is at the top left, Dobble. It's good, it's a card game. Oh, I love it, it's great, it's quite intense. I went on a school trip and it was with 3 members of staff I didn't really know that well, and all had a bit of a reputation of you got to get in there with them a little bit, it's not easy. So I took this card game and it was great. Every night we'd have a couple of games. And I made sure at first I lost. Because no one likes playing a game that you don't really understand if you get smashed, do you? So I was like, well, let them win. And then I was like, now I'll start beating them. But the problem was, they were actually quite good. So I couldn't, which is really annoying. And it kept, but we really bonded over that. And one of the members of staff, she was quite cold and quite hard work. By the end of that week, totally different towards me. And we had a really good connection. And it meant every time I passed her in the corridor, I could be like, hey, how you doing? It's now got to the point where we actually get on really well, and she's actually started to open up about stuff in her life to me, because I think she sees me as a trustworthy person. That started because I was like, let's do a bit of community stuff, because there isn't enough of it. I don't know what it's like in your workplace, but in a school it's busy the whole time, and it's always something you should be doing. And so very few people feel like they have actual time to relax. People feel guilty about going to the staff room and just relaxing over lunch, because they feel like I should be doing this. But I'm like, this is the one thing you really need. You need to be around people for 15, 20 minutes and just switch off and just have a laugh. When I was at Bible college, there was a couple of guys, and we used to watch, that's Jules Holland there, the music show. Every Friday night, it just became a thing where we just watch it. And that was just a really nice community. We really bonded over that, actually. And we started being like, one of us would get a packet of sweets or whatever, get some drinks in. But it was really good kind of community time. Or, how many times, you got a meal there, how many times did Jesus do it over food? Let's share some time together over a meal. Or I've just started doing at work, this game here, Spike Ball. You get a little net, you bounce a ball. And there were a couple of guys at work, and I was like, I think you'll like this. And at first they were like, oh, I don't know, I'm not sure. But we did it, and I'm telling you, just 2 hours of playing that outside, they wanted to keep going as well, on the school field. I felt like we've really bonded here, and you needed this. And everyone just felt so much more, you could see a change come over people, even after that. They spent some decent time with each other, doing something. And we needed a context. It wasn't let's just sit down and talk, it was we needed to do an activity. So when it talks about, we can offer people that. I really think that's what's one thing we can do as a follower of Jesus now. We can offer connection and community. And it can be simple things. It might mean a huge deal to people. So, one or two other practical points, okay, Louise? Yeah, okay. Next one. Okay, community encourages us to do great things. This is the current leader of Samoa. I can't remember her name. She's got 3 names and one of them's Naomi. That's it. Anyway, but she said the reason why she ended up becoming the leader of Samoa, because she was encouraged by this group of women she'd meet up with regularly. They spend lots of time together, and they said they've got a margarita and salsa club. So they meet up for drinks, and then they do a little dance kind of thing. But they're on the right, and she said they were the ones who encouraged her of, I think you should go for politics, and I think you should go for this leadership. And she basically said, the reason why I'm here and the reason why I think I'm doing a good job is because of these women, because I've got a community who are for me and encourage me. People are looking for that. People need that. It's an amazing thing we can offer as the church, I think. Okay, second. Or you might know these people. Anyone know who they are? We'll say it again, Barbara?
Not a clue.
Oh. These guys are the Inklings. It's the kind of group that J.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis are part of, where they used to meet regularly at a pub in Oxford. And they would just get together and just enjoy time with each other, and then they'd share about what they're writing about in a moment. So some of the first people who heard the Chronicles of Narnia or the Lord of the Rings were their mates down the pub. And they used to offer little tips and stuff like that. But they said, apparently, they just used to love being around each other, and they were really good mates. So 2 of the greatest works of fiction in the last 600 years have came out of a community who just kept meeting at the pub. Okay, next one. Okay, community gives us strength in times of difficulty. I love that picture in the Good News Bible on this verse. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you'll fulfill the law of Christ. Rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. Community is a place where if you're having a rubbish week or a rubbish year, you've got people around you who can just be there with you. It's people where if you're having a birthday, can sing to you. That kind of thing. But it makes such a difference to be in community. That's why I think one of the enemy's biggest plans is to get us out of community. Because it makes such a difference to be in there, have that support. Lots of people I know who aren't Christians think it's mental that I've got so many people in my church family of all different ages and backgrounds who would invite me around to dinner, or I could go and talk to, if that makes sense. They just can't get their head around it, but they're always like, that must be great. And I'm like, yeah, it's pretty good. Okay, next one. Community makes us more like Jesus. It's really hard to forgive someone if you're not around anyone to forgive. If that makes sense. If you really want to grow in him, if you want to become more kind, more gracious, more compassionate, if you really want to love like we're called to in 1 Corinthians 13, you've got to have people to do it. And it doesn't really make a huge difference if you only do it with the people you really, really like, and it's easy. It's when it's the person who you find a bit harder. It's when it's the person your personalities clash that it really makes a difference. This is what I found the communities I've been in, like the one in Wales. When you commit to one another and you make the effort and you put into practice what Jesus said, it grows you massively. And that's where the real deep bonds grow. I've known some real kind of intimacy with some people where I'm like, I don't even like you that much, to be honest. I know you don't really like me. But that changes over time because we put into practice what Jesus said. And you start to be like, actually, no, you are really great. And I'm sorry that was so annoying view on that and ungracious. And I'd say actually one of the reasons why I think I've got better at meeting new people, or I've got better at welcoming people in, or I've got better at being kind and gracious, is because I've been in communities where sometimes it's been hard work. I was at the pub the other day, and one of the teachers brought her boyfriend along, and you could tell he felt awkward a little bit because he didn't really know anyone. So I was like, right, I'm going to go sit next to him and just ask him some questions about his life, and then open it up to the whole group. And I could tell at the end it made a great deal to her, and she'd seen something different. And I was like, I hope that she's seen something of Jesus in that, of what he's like. That it's not just James being nice, that there is that's what Jesus is like, and that's what we need. And last one, God promises us a future community. If you look right at the end of the book of Revelation, it's got this metaphor of God is going to create a heavenly Jerusalem. But just think, he could use any metaphor he wants, but he uses the metaphor of a massive city of people. Because that's what cities are, aren't they? Yes. They're made up of people. But I don't think it's going to be like a London where no one looks each other in the eye and you can spend the whole week without really saying hello to anyone. I think it's a city of love and community and engagement. And that's the image he gives us. I love it. It says, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. So it's a place where we're connected with one another and we're connected with God properly for all eternity. And that's why loneliness and disconnection, individualism, is so poisonous and dangerous, because it's so the opposite of God's nature and what he wants. So right now, a question that would be good for all of us to ask is, what could we do to show what it's going to be like and who God is and what we're aiming at now? That's why, as a church, I think it can be just as important, that chat you have with someone over coffee, as what was going on in the worship time. Because God is present in there and he's making a difference in there. To finish, before I pray, one thing I'm asking my question now. I was like, okay, well, there's lots of people kind of my age or younger, so in their 30s or 20s, who are, I'm like, and I wish they would come up to me and be like, James, how can I be saved? Can you spend 20 minutes telling me about Jesus, please? But they don't. But I'm like, but what's the thing that's going on in their lives? And pretty much all of them have admitted, quite often I feel quite lonely, or it's been hard to get to know people in Cambridge, or I spent quite a lot of time by myself. And so I've been like, okay, well maybe the best way I can show them Jesus is, let's do stuff. In the staff room, I did a little quiz. I did a Monday quiz with James on my little table with a group of people, because I was like, let's just do something that's a bit more communal. There's someone else, and they always sat by themselves, and so I was like, right, I'm going to go and have my lunch with them. I invited round a few of the guys around for dinner one night, and it was a really great time actually. It was brilliant because it was like we were out of the workplace, so it was just nice just to kind of relax. And they were saying, a lot of them said, I've never been invited to dinner. I've been here at Cambridge 4 years and I haven't been invited round to anyone's house. This is the first time. And I felt like, do you know what? This is a way I can show Jesus. This is something good. Final thing, one or two of them invited along to football on Monday nights. And the quality's all right. I mean, it's not that great. But the main thing I'm like is like, this is a community. And it's a real privilege for me to invite people I've met at work who play football to come along, and to know when they come along, Ben's going to go and say hello. And not just hello, like he's genuinely interested in your life. And Toby is as well, and Owen is as well. And it's going to be a good atmosphere. And you feel after 2 or 3 weeks, they really feel like part of it. And they feel like part of something. And I'm like, that's a way we're showing what Jesus is. It's easy to think of this, it has to be big things, when actually it can be as simple as the small things. And maybe God's calling us to do that. So let's just pray then. Father God, thank you so much that Jesus, when you came to rescue us, part of that was you connected us back to the Father. And thank you that we have that. We have relationship and connection with you. But Father, as well, as I pray that in the same way, Jesus, your heart was so that people would connect with one another, that you would help us to be people who know that in our own lives. Lord, I just pray right now for anyone who feels lonely or disconnected, or like things are hard. I just pray for change on that, God. And I pray that you give us the wisdom of what steps we might need to do to remedy that. And I pray right now for us as a church and a community. Thank you, Lord God, that so often it does feel like a family. And that's a strength for our church. And I pray that you continue to bless us in that and grow us in it. Lord, help us to know more and more what that looks like to be there for each other and support one another. And I just pray, Holy Spirit, right now you speak to us about what we can do to remedy this problem in our culture. I pray that you drop into our minds and our hearts like little things, Father. Like maybe even just someone we can go and talk to or someone we could invite around. And I just pray, Father God, you give us wisdom of how to do that. And I just pray, Holy Spirit, your peace on all of us right now. Whatever anyone is going through today, I pray just your peace on us. And I pray, Father God, that you would help us to love one another and enjoy one another and grow our community. And we pray as well, Father, if there are other people in Eddington and Darwin Green and places like that and they need community, that God, you would send them to us and you would help us to quickly welcome them in and you'd build us up to be that community that reflects you. Amen. Amen.